Compiled from news agencies around the world, this is Radio Luxembourg News.
And this is Rob Jones with the details behind those headlines. The 12-month ordeal of the American hostages in Iran may soon be over. Parliament has finally agreed to release the 52 hostages on 4 conditions. They are that the United States promises not to interfere in Iran's affairs, unfreezes Iranian assets in the U.S., drops all financial claims against Iran, and returns the property of the late Shah. Tonight, President Carter is meeting with Senate and senior aides at the White House, having cut short an election rally in Chicago. Secretary of State Edmund Muskie says the conditions will not be accepted until they've been very carefully analyzed.
Mr. Carter said he talked with the State Department this morning and decided on the exchange of documents to secure the release of the hostages. The President wouldn't go into the contents of those documents, but he added this: what we will propose will be to uphold our nation's honor and integrity, and we'll make it public at the proper time. I think Americans will be pleased. The State Department said later that so far America had made no response to Iran's conditions. The text from Tehran needed careful study, but no one should think America would delay its reply unduly. What can't be known yet is what impact all this will have on the election. It could produce a last-minute surge of voters who've at last made up their minds and rallied to the man in charge of the big decisions, the incumbent president. That late rally could save Mr. Carter's presidency. But he himself told newsmen today that the hostage deadlock has generally worked against him. In his words, it has obviously been a negative political factor. But I think the way we've handled the matter has been best under difficult circumstances.
It is midnight in London, 7 o'clock in the evening here in New York. In Britain, Labour MPs have voted once for a leader and must vote again. Here in the United States, the people are still voting for the next president.
Thanks, Bob. Well, we'll have more world news on the hour at 2. Well, if November the 5th means bonfire night to you rather than the old razzmatazz of the USA elections, we haven't forgotten you. We'll be waffling on, yes, but that's about more of the interesting side to politics, but the music's just as important, with a distinctly American flavour. Tom Jones is Welsh. Well, we don't want to be too predictable, do we?
Tom Jones, and you came a long way from St. Louis. Well, never mind. He was going on, but we were as well. I tell you what I'd like to do. I would like to introduce a man who's going to hold our hand through the weary watches of the night, right through until 7:30 on our election special. Now, he is a man who knows just about everything there is to know about American elections, short of actually being president himself, and his name is Clark Todd. He's an American journalist, and he's with us now. Clark, good evening. Good morning to you.
Good morning. I must say, you mentioned earlier that you were sitting comfortably and hoped everyone else was. I think your message probably wouldn't have gone very well in Plains, Georgia, where President Carter is certainly probably not sitting very comfortably at all. It's going to be a long night and certainly a very difficult race. They're aiming for 270. That is the magic number, if you like, that gets a president elected, and that's the count in the Electoral College. At the moment, according to the projections, if you can believe it, and the polls haven't even closed in most places, they're at a projected total of 252 for Reagan so far and 12 for President Carter, hence the discomfiture he's no doubt feeling. But it is going to be a long night. There's only 4% of the vote in so far, and perhaps President Carter is taking some comfort with that and counseling Amy that you mustn't count your races before the votes are all in. But we'll see how it goes.
Can you just give us a brief idea of how these predictions work? And how accurate are they? Because, we have pollsters and all those sort of things, and they're notoriously inaccurate, but these aren't pollsters in the same way, are they?
Well, not really. This is not Robert McKenzie and his swingometer. This is much more complex than that. What does happen is that the networks will send little reporters out, and they will interview people as they come out of polling booths and say, how did you vote? And on the basis of that, they get an idea of the trend, because they can look at the past record, how various districts voted, and if a majority appear to be voting Democrat in a Republican area, then they could measure a swing toward the Democratic Party or vice versa. In this case, it seems very much the versa, because the swing seems to be very much toward Reagan. Now, the key states that we're watching are Pennsylvania, Michigan, New Jersey, Texas. These are states where it can be very close, and they're very critical because they have large numbers of electoral votes. And if a president or if a candidate manages to win New York and Illinois and California, he is going to be very tough to beat because the other candidate is going to win just about everything else in order to make up for it.
But how accurate are those predictions, I mean, on past experience?
I would say there are an awful lot of jobs riding on those predictions, so I think they're going to be right. They don't get them wrong. It's not inconceivable. They might make small errors, but to suggest that the polling is so inaccurate as to allow a disparity like 252 to 12 to be turned around in the next half hour would, I think, be...
But would you have expected anything like that? I mean, just saying 252 to 12 seems ridiculously...
Yes, but this is very early. And with only 4% of the vote in, that sort of number is not at all unusual. And it will begin, the gap will close very much as the southern states come in for President Carter. And probably some of the western states come in for Ronald Reagan. The gap will shift during the night. It's a long horse race, many hurdles yet to go.
Well, we had a Welshman singing about St. Louis. We've now got some Scotsmen and a string of pearls, a Glenn Miller hit from the SRM.
And this is the Voice of America, broadcasting throughout the world with complete coverage of the 1980 presidential election results. I am William McCrory at the VOA Election Center. My colleague and co-anchorman, VOA correspondent Robert Lodge.
It's 3 o'clock. This is Carol Allen. Ronald Reagan will be the next president of the United States. Jimmy Carter has conceded defeat after a landslide victory to his Republican opponent. This is how he told the nation just a few moments ago.
I promised you 4 years ago that I would never lie to you. So I can't stand here tonight and say it doesn't hurt.
Seven o'clock on Wednesday, the 5th of November. The American presidential election, forecast as a close-run thing, has ended in a landslide. Mr. Ronald Reagan swept aside President Carter to win an overwhelming majority in the Electoral College. In return for their votes, Mr. Reagan made this pledge to the electorate.
I consider the trust that you have placed in me sacred, and I give you my sacred oath that I will do my utmost to justify your faith.
President-elect Ronald Reagan. And from London, the rest of the news headlines. Labour MPs have now begun round 2 of the election for a new leader, and the final result could be very close. Fords are bringing in a tough new code of discipline after the run of disputes which have hit the escort. And the Provisional IRA have put on a show of strength in Belfast.
So, Ronald Reagan, age 69, former Hollywood actor, former governor of California, will be the 40th president of the United States. The Reagan camp had been confident of victory, but they had also been resigned to a long wait and a tight finish before their candidate would be declared winner. As it turned out, the election was as good as won, while voters on the West Coast were still going into the polls. Computer forecasts soon gave Mr. Reagan victory in a string of marginal states, and in others which Mr. Carter must have been confident of holding. Mr. Carter's speech of concession was one of the earliest in the history of American politics. Just before 10 o'clock, he left the White House and went to meet his supporters at one of the city's top hotels. He told them he had already been in contact with Mr. Reagan, pledging his cooperation in the handover of power. Mr. Carter did not hide his feelings.
I promised you 4 years ago that I would never lie to you. So I can't stand here tonight and say it doesn't hurt. The people of the United States have made their choice, and of course I accept that decision. But I have to admit, not with the same enthusiasm that I accepted the decision 4 years ago.
Well, Mr. Carter's supporters sounded cheerful enough, as though even defeat meant that the uncertainty was over. Among the Reagan supporters, joy was unconfined, while cheers greeted the new incumbent as he and his family ascended the platform at a hotel in Los Angeles. Our correspondent, Paul Reynolds, was with the Reagan camp.
The celebrations are still going on here. Dozens of campaign workers and Republican supporters are enjoying a victory which was foreseen as far back as 1964 by the Californians who first pressed Mr. Reagan to run for public office. Mr. Reagan had been expecting to win. The momentum of his campaign has built up over the past few days, and his private opinion poll expert was predicting as early as Saturday that there might be a landslide. From the moment the first results came in, the people here knew that Mr. Reagan would be the next president.
It all happened so quickly that it was over long before the polls even closed in California, Mr. Reagan's home state. Mr. Reagan himself accepted victory in a relaxed style that was accentuated by the appearance of his family on stage with him. His leathery face turned serious. He declared that he had never felt more humble, and he showed by this performance how he had managed to defuse the warmonger attacks on him by President Carter. The ease of the victory did surprise many Reagan aides. They scored in every area they had targeted, especially the South and the Northern Industrial Belt. What happened essentially was that their strategy for the election worked. They overcame the public perception of Mr. Reagan as someone inadequate for the job, and then they turned on Mr. Carter himself in the final part of the campaign. The party will go on here for some time. It's still not midnight in California, and these people have plenty to celebrate. Now over to Washington for a general assessment of the election results from Clive Small.
It's been one of the most devastating rejections ever suffered by an incumbent president. The man who'd achieved the Camp David peace treaty and who'd built bridges between the United States and Africa and China was swept out of office on a powerful wave of public frustration with America's predicament in the world. People were bitterly hurt by high levels of inflation and unemployment at home. But above all, they were enraged by the spectacle of America being blackmailed, as they saw it, by third-rate nations, the countries who hold the world's oil, and in particular, the one nation which holds, even today, 52 Americans hostage. People turned in their millions to Mr. Reagan because he promised to take big government off their backs, cut their taxes, and give American business firms their head. And abroad, he promised to build up the military strength of the United States so as to make the Soviet Union and the Third World respect American power. Overnight, Mr. Carter's constituency had deserted him and gone over to a Republican who occupies the right of center in American politics. And it looks as if Mr. Reagan will have wide support in the country and even in Congress as he starts his presidency on January the 20th. In the intervening weeks, he'll have Mr. Carter's full cooperation. The president made that promise when he conceded defeat. In these next few weeks, there'll be a final twist of irony for President Carter. He'll probably have to negotiate the release of the hostages in Iran, one of the main reasons for the national frustration that drove him from office.
Clive Small. One other question immediately arises. What will Mr. Reagan's victory mean for the prospects of an early release for those Tehran hostages? It had already become clear by last night that there are difficulties over the procedure between Washington and Tehran. The Iranian Foreign Ministry have called on the Americans to respond as quickly as possible and in public to the conditions laid down at the weekend for the hostages' release. However, a State Department spokesman in Washington said this was impossible. The United States would not rush its reply, and when the response was finalized, it would be relayed not through the news media, but through the usual diplomatic channels. In Tehran, there is evidently no official reaction to Mr. Reagan's victory, though a Foreign Ministry spokesman has evidently said it doesn't make any difference who won. Well, quite apart from the presidential race, the American electorate has also been voting for members of Congress, senators and members of the House of Representatives. Our special correspondent in the United States, Peter Ruff, has been monitoring those races for us here in New York, and as he reports now, the Reagan bandwagon was equally evident there.
12 hours ago, no one even mentioned the possibility that the Republicans might snatch control of the Senate, but they appear to be poised to do so, having won or are leading in 10 contests. It'll be the first time for a quarter of a century that they'll be in control, and they've swept from power some of the most powerful Democrats. George McGovern of South Dakota, the presidential candidate in 1972 against Richard Nixon. Birch Bayh of Indiana. Frank Church of Idaho, chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, Warren Magnuson of Washington, and Jacob Javits, the veteran campaigner of New York, who was standing as a liberal this time. In the battle for the lower house, the Democrats look as if they'll remain safely in control, but they've lost more than 20 seats. So when Mr. Reagan gets to the White House, he will find a Congress of a more Republican flavor, with the Democrats, so long in control of both houses, licking their wounds.
And now for the rest of the news, back to Laurie Macmillan in London.
Mr. Reagan has such solid support that his advisers must feel he can carry out some of those bold promises he made. For instance, he said he'd cut taxes dramatically and at the same time spend much more on defense. Economically, that seemed a contradiction, but one of his financial advisers says that now it's eminently possible. The reason for that optimism lies in the remarkable change in America's political direction, a clear swing to the right in the place where it counts, Congress. The Republicans have taken effective control of the Senate away from the Democrats. That could mean that Mr. Reagan will have the vital support of the Senate if he goes back to the Russians and seeks to renegotiate an amended strategic weapons treaty. He's now on much stronger ground in pursuing that uncertain enterprise. And the swing to the right is clear in the House of Representatives, too. The present tally of figures shows that the Democrats have 244 seats and the Republicans 191. That's a Republican gain of 32. The House Speaker, Mr. Tip O'Neill, called it a disaster. For the Republicans, it's an opportunity, the sort of opening to power that one of their presidents hasn't had for about a quarter of a century. The question now is whether Mr. Reagan can make use of that mandate to carry out programs that will restore the nation to economic self-confidence and lift it out of its present volatile and frustrated mood.
Has won the presidential elections in the United States. Mr. Reagan is 69. He is the former governor of California. He will be sworn in as the 40th president of the United States on January the 20th next year. The Republicans also secured a majority of seats in the Senate. Mr. Reagan's victory is seen in the United States as indicating that the electorate was influenced by Mr. Carter's failure to fulfill his election pledges concerning both foreign and home policies. Only 53% of the electorate took part in the elections, which is the lowest turnout in the past 32 years.